Klim somehow manages to bullshit the assembled forces into the Toasanga's good graces when they next make contact, despite the one he was bullshitting being the head of the Doret family. And the distinction between them and the Rayhuntans is explained more by Raraya, with more of the lesser families aligning with one or the other. With Ida, the heir of the Rayhuntans, who was sent into hiding when the Dorets seized power a decade ago from their time frame. Though Klim himself is getting their favor by dangling before them what they want to begin with, a return to Earth without opposition. Yeah, they're not currently on Earth or in contact with Earth for Klim to be able to make those promises. They're empty words without some way of making them honor their side of the bargain, which they can't while they're dimensionally displaced into Alworth's universe. Now, a ceasefire so they could all return home, where they could then open up a proper dialogue so everyone gets what they want, is one thing. But again, that's not how this game is treating the events. It basically forgetting the Isekai plot has happened when it comes to these story bits from G-Reco. And worse, Klim is offering it primarily in exchange for the Doret supporting his own bid to take over his nation of Ameria, which does not have a hereditary succession system, meaning he's asking them to help him conquer his homeland. However, the deal falls through, as the Doret have already allied with G-Reco's villain Kampa, who's passed along Stupid Hair's deal to them that he'll send them home once he has full control of Alworth. And for some reason that plot point rubs me the wrong way, though not because of the Tomino character stuff, but instead because of how Stupid Hair's being used here, and I'm not entirely sure why. Embryo in Cross-Ange is a depicted definition of a guy with a god complex masquerading as a god due to his dimensionally displaced immortality and the literal designer clone homunculi that worshipped him in his planned society, appearing as a benevolent deity until you go against his controls and command, wherein he reveals the true monster. As V depicted him, he was the master manipulator behind the scenes, controlling puppets who spread his malice to the rest of the world, which required entirely separate factions secretly worked to counter and undermine him because he was not omniscient, while the few he allied with acting to further the scope of his dominion. With the story's amalgamation building him up as a bigger villain, while not necessarily making those intersecting stories solely slaved to the newer tale. But here, I think the problem is rooted in how Embryo doesn't already control Alworth in its entirety. And I don't see him settling for that as long as it appears he has to then have him ally with as many factions as now have come under Mitsurugi's banner. Moreover, he is far too directly in play in this game. As while the various faction heads are still his minions, he acts more as a micromanager for the lot of them, and his influence is felt directly, so there isn't exactly the same build-up to throwing off the strings of a puppeteer. And consequently, overblowing him weakens the positions of all the other villains allied with him, as their motivations and malice then become slave to him, instead of coinciding or coming about because of his actions. In V, neither Embryo nor Leonard superseded the other stories despite their collaboration, but it feels like that is happening in X. The Cross-Ange cast as a whole being used to facilitate these other stories, but those stories in turn not giving back to support its own. Instead, such feeling mishandled to the point it starts to feel exploitative. Klim's counter to this is to declare he had hero plant bombs all over the colony, but considering the root of Hero's emotional trauma came from him accidentally murdering a child, there is no way in hell Hero was convinced to do that. Char intervening so Doret cannot call their bluff, and escorting them out as he knew this would be the worst way to do all this. Char's reasoning for assisting the greater Toasanga organization is not revealed here, just to allow the UC-related characters to condemn and scapegoat him further for the evils in their universe that are certainly not his fault as they did not disappear with his death. Bottom line of the plot as it's revealed later, Char supports the Rayhuntan branch's views and sought to undermine the extremes the Dorets are pushing the others towards, thanks to them echoing the extremism of certain members of the Zabi family, which he killed. But he's doing it in the way he did back in the original 0079 Gundam, where he pretended to collaborate with their goals while pursuing differing ones intended to throw off the slavery shackles of elitist tyranny. But as usual when it comes to Char, this is neither recognized nor acknowledged internally with intent to always place him in the wrong. And because he didn't get that help he was asking for, he's stuck collaborating. This is also why we saw a scene of him trying to get Amuro and Tobiya on his side, because he needs help to handle this, as otherwise he's going to be dragged to extremes he does not want to go to. Thanks to the Guild Sentry having records on how the consequences of his own actions play out, again, thanks to Hathaway's flash being by default canon to explain F91 Crossbone and Victory's setting, Char himself is not to blame for them thanks to the Federation's Declare Eminent Domain law being no different than what Char was trying to do, just without the infrastructure that would have allowed it to work. And it's the lack of infrastructure that would allow it to work is what made such go wrong, as it caused extreme classism to form instead of enabling a restoration of equality. But since it's the same result regardless, he is never informed that the Axis drop didn't succeed, so he blames himself for the move to space going wrong. And he's trying to do something different that can only be done by going through the motions of his old roles, unless he has other people with him to give him alternative options, which Amuro refused to listen to on the grounds of it was Char asking. But to contrast Char actually trying to learn from the past to prevent future issues, we have how Ida and Bellry are treating the revelation of their status as the heirs of the Ryujin, with Ida lambasting them and declaring new eras aren't shaped by the old. Literally every society that whitewashes and erases their own history then repeats ad nauseum the mistakes of the previous one that collapsed due to not learning from them. Ignorance of history, politics, economics, and a whole host of other matters do not make the problems that may be caused by them go away. New eras are literally built from the foundations of the old ones and learning from them. Case in point, the road to Giza in Egypt was first constructed 4,000 years ago, and that road is still in active use today. The era of the pharaohs may be over, but the infrastructure they first built for their country still continues to endure. You don't just throw out something that works. And that's G. Recco's royal smart person that's saying something that stupid. To contrast, we are over 30 years removed from when Ronald Reagan was in presidential office in America, and we are still paying the consequences of policies and decisions implemented during this tenure as president, as there has been consistent obfuscation about how harmful so many of them were and continue to be. So because so many people do not learn how bad they are, they still continue to screw us over as they have not been repealed. Now it could just be the stewards of House Ryujin dropping all of the expected duties of their family on them that facilitated that response. But as much as I hate the idea of royalty still existing that far into the future, the entire dereliction of responsibilities towards the people that are only acting to facilitate and perpetuate the conflicts of their setting is not a good look for either character, nor is the continued shafting of Ida's character to make it seem like she's the problem when Bellry's actions continue to be the more egregious of the two. Case in point on that, when the Twilight Knights make their retreat from the colony, Bellry screws them all over by going back for Raraya, who had stayed behind voluntarily, and thus causing them all to come under attack despite it being her choice to stay behind. Bellry endangered everyone around him, including his just-revealed sister, because he disagreed with a personal choice that did not endanger the one who had made it, out of his own selfish, egotistical pride. I genuinely do not get the appeal of this character, nor the way this has written him here, as there are so many easy ways around this, not the least of which them being ambushed on their way out, so they'd be forced to fight, instead of Bellry's actions screwing them all over. Especially since the entire matter is going to be mediated with new unit reinforcements in this stage anyways. Tobiya given the all-clear from Char, who had rescued the space pirate when they first got to Alworth, to go and join the Knights, telling him his kindness is based on how he doesn't want to taste the pain of losing a younger person he put his faith in ever again. Okay, I need to stop and explain something, as most people don't know about the scene at all. In my Super Robot Wars V review, I described Char as going inexplicably evil during the events of Char's counterattack as that is factually true. The movie presents him as irredeemably evil out of nowhere, providing no reason to the extremes he is going to in order to break the yoke upon humanity's back that is the Earth Federation's authoritarian tyranny. Tomino gave no explanation for the shift in characterization that took place to validate this path for him, whereas when we last saw him, he was fighting with the anti-Earth Union group against the Titan faction of the Federation, and also Neo-Zeon, wherein he was advocating reform for the Federation led by all nations, space colonies included, to prevent these same atrocities from repeating themselves. And then after an offhand mention by his sister Sayla at the end of Double Zeta that he was doing something evil, suddenly Char's back doing all the things he was vehemently against. This do not connect. Nothing in Char's counterattack does anything to explain it. However, a scene does exist that attempts to seed that descent into madness.
Kami! いくら希望を見出しても、地球の重力に魂を惹かれた者たちのエゴに押しつぶされ、結局はこんな悲しみだけが繰り返されていく。ならば、一昔前の人々は9世紀のロケットの G に耐えながら空に上がった。彼らは空にこそ希望の大地があると信じた。自分たちを空へ追いやった地球のエリートたちを憎むことより、その方がよほど建設的だと考えたのだ。地球の重力を振り切った時、人は新たなセンスを身につけた。それがニュータイプへの開花へとつながった。そういう意味では確かに空に希望はあったのだ。
And that scene could have been great. A complete loss of faith in humanity has the weight of Char's sins and a true realization of where the origins of evil in the setting come from. That would have completely recontextualized his actions. The problem is, they didn't put it in the movie. Because Tomino didn't want Char from the beginning to be seen as anything but a villain. He just forgot that a character like Char is complicated, has to have a motivation, and not be a freaking straw man. And the story of UC Gundam, as it had been developed, disagreed with the direction Char's character itself took. Ergo, everything done in the years after to explicitly try and demonize him that has only served to make the entire setting more imbecilic. I am not a fan of Gundam the Origin, so you're all probably wondering where that scene's from. A deleted flashback from Char's counterattack? Nope. The Gundam Zeta New Translation movies in the 2000s? No, not there either. That scene comes from the 1997 PlayStation 1 video game adaptation of Zeta Gundam, buried in the back of Char's story scenario. The game and ending, while based on Zeta Gundam, is 100% a non-canon depiction of Zeta's events. However, ever since that game, that scene, which was written and animated by Tomino, keeps being counted as part of canon and brought up time and again as the explanation and validation of Char's actions. That Camille's loss at the end of Zeta made Char lose faith in humanity, and in a fit of depression and nihilism was consumed by the worst impulses of Zeon, which he then just enabled as a means to just finally break off the cycle of UC Gundam's abuse by the Federation's leadership. Now I can see Char feeling guilty over Camille's fate due to basically everyone mistreating Camille during Zeta, but not to the extent of wanting to drop an asteroid on the planet. That would be the last step only if he found no other ways to make reforms preventing the abuse of the people possible, so that war would be the only way to take the bad faith actors of Universal Century out of power. And by evidence of the later Universal Century content, it actually was. After the Axis incident, they still maintained their power and kept being abusive assholes. And thus, in the metatextual reading of the longer narrative of Universal Century Gundam, Char's still not the bad guy Tomino and UC Gundam keeps trying to demonize him as. Dropping Axis on Earth still needs to be stopped due to the innocence it would affect, but continuing the active myopia of who's behind every UC conflict helps no one, as even if Char surrenders, someone else is going to pop up having seen the problem, and either try and exploit it for their own gain, hello F91 and victory, or walk the same path Char did in trying to take the bad faith leadership of the Federation out of power, hello Unicorn Gundam, as nothing will change unless that happens. This becomes the problem with a lot of the SRW games trying to shift Char away from what is viewed as the radical end. He already would have had to try the less destructive means first, only to see they went nowhere, in order to build up to the point where he can justify for his characterization the decision to drop Axis in the first place. But if the system is that broken that it requires an Armageddon event to fix things, then getting them to back down is the same as saying, this cannot be fixed. And no belief in humanity speech is going to be convincing when the side opposing them keeps ignoring that there is a problem in the first place. X does not thread that needle. V, well, that is one of V's few screw-ups, to be frank. But the following game, Super Robot Wars Team, I hope to get to it, but in the event I don't, it manages to do it by actually proving Char is 100% right, while making it so Axis isn't needed to then take the malicious parties out of power, primarily because all but the end boss of the game already had been, which in turn makes Char's actions leading up to the Axis drop utterly meaningless, as the reform he was seeking was already happening, thus making the difficult part of that recruitment just getting him to work with us instead of the other way around, when all the UC protagonists themselves do nothing but antagonize him for the choices he felt forced to make to build up forces by which to counter the actual bad guys. Which admittedly is a different problem entirely, but that is the issue with using Char in these games now. Fans want to see him. He is one of the most popular characters of the Gundam franchise. There is wide acknowledgement that Tomino screwed up with him, and there's not much time before his actor will pass away. But the games don't know how to use him due to how perception of the Gundam content with him has been recontextualized with time. So he's not considered the villain of the story, and those who were fighting him look like moral aggrandizing hypocrites as a result, because he keeps asking for their help so he doesn't have to go to the extremes he ends up going to, and the supposed heroes keep telling him no, solely because it is him that is asking. So then he has no choice but to do the bad things, as he can't just do nothing.
Choice is an illusion created between those with power and those without.
So yeah, this leads to Tobia and Amuro escaping as well to join our forces, as does Raraya, as the reason she stayed behind was to get equipped with G Reko's third primary Gundam, the G Lucifer, which is equipped with a trio of mean super funnels, and to top it all off, a Moonlight Butterfly system like that of the Turn A and Turn X Gundams. Or at the very least something that looks like a Moonlight Butterfly system, due to Tomino's previous involvement with Turn A Gundam. As I said 4 videos ago, Tomino was not aware that alternate Gundam continuities were a thing, was only later informed by fans of such, and Turn A Gundam only makes sense in its own amalgam universe separate from everything else. Thus, why the G Lucifer itself acts as one of the few remaining snarls out of Sunrise's attempts to untangle the mess of this misinterpretation that Tomino has since come to agree with. And since the G Lucifer at no point activates the matter destruction properties of the Moonlight Butterfly system, those wings the Lucifer sprouts instead act no differently than the wings of light systems of the Victory 2, Destiny, Strike Freedom, or O Gundam, where it's a beam propulsion system more than an actual attack. Hell, for all we know, they in a roundabout way lifted the utilization of it in the way Chris did in Symphogear, since her swan song itself was a bunch of Gundam references. Regardless, they all managed to escape. Char concerned they won't be able to accept the truth he has learned about the Reguiled Century being a consequence of no one coming to break the Federation leader's hold, and fall into despair as he had regarding it. Which then flips us to the other side of the route splits, and Kurama once more reporting to Dwokdar's forces, though his loyalties are becoming more and more conflicted, as once more why he's doing this is his village is under a curse of Dwokdar's, and he's acting to try and free them from it. But ironically, one of Vivian's lollipops that contain a medicine within them that allows Vivian to maintain her human form. As for those who may have forgotten or not seen my previous videos on the subject, Vivian is actually a dragon. Well, it ends up being eaten by Kurama, and the properties of that medicine also work to banish the curse on Kurama, returning him to human form, at least temporarily. Meaning he could just tell the knights this and get more of that medicine for his people as a temporary cure. He doesn't. Why? I have no idea. But this brings us to a reintroduction that is far overdue, with Koji Kabuto and the Mazinger crew now found in Alworth as well. Them having been mentioned by Wataru at the beginning of the game as the other major warrior from the World of Peace, but are only now appearing over a third of the way through it, fighting Dr. Hell's minions that have been brought here as well, and apparently become one of those who've allied with Dwokdar. Bracken going an even further level of creepy than we usually see of him, with him perving on all of the Cross-Ange cast, with intent for Tusk to then act really pervy in response. As previously established, Tusk was unintentionally and accidentally perving on Ange in the original series, and it was a disliked aspect of his character even then. V toning that down was a good thing. X returning it, and deliberately presenting him as being a perv on purpose and not accidentally, is not a good thing. This stage also introduces the next of Dwokdar's generals, Soya, who drew everyone to these burning plains created by the next artifact to recover, the Burning Sword. Though as we fight, we get context to where these Mazinger characters are from respective to their series. The dialogue confirming that they are from the proper canon of Mazinger Edition Z The Impact, and not just using the character models because they were the most recent ones at the time. Their continuity syncing up with the very last episode of The Impact before they got ported over here. So yes, this is another series that is set in their respective post-story segments. At the very least, it's acknowledged, as I don't remember if they ever stated what continuity was being counted for the Mazinger cast in V, just that they were there to eventually lead to the material with Mazinger Zero. But with the tide of battle turning too quickly against Soya, he used as the burning blade to boil the lava the blade had already created, risking to create a magma explosion from that. Omri explaining amidst this that the burning blade is supposed to be a paired sword with the frigid blade, once held by a pair of lovers which allowed them to maintain the seasons of the world. They need something fireproof to steal back that sword, which is where Vivian not having her medicine comes into play, as she reverts to her dragon form, which would allow her protection enough against the blade's fire to steal it back. It's the first thing she's done all game. Hell, it's only this stage that remembers that Vivian needs those medicinal lollipops to not revert to this form, and there's no chance she had a significant supply of them when she was traveling with everyone else early in the game. So again, why was Hilda not substituted in for her in the early stages? 'Cause that still makes more sense. The downside of that is Vivian is too out of it after her abrupt transformation to actually do the job. All the knights retreating as the area becomes just too unstable. Anja's song enough to calm Vivian down to get her out of there. She recovers back on the ship with more of the medicinal candies, as the Arsenal team actually seeing the transformation in this iteration prevents them from trying to attack her, as they know enough of Vivian's nature to not believe that she would be an enemy infiltrator, meaning the game can immediately shift the blame over the secret keeping onto their commander Jill, as well as Nemo, who as discussed before is well acquainted with Jill. Kurama, however, has made his choice, outing himself as a spy for Dwokdar as he attempts to abduct Nadia, drawing enough attention to the act that everyone is alerted to what he's doing. Him saying he's fleeing to the temple where the frigid sword is sealed, and takes a knocked-out Kimiko with him instead, which is in and of itself an indication of which side he's chosen, as his instruction was to abduct Nadia, not Wataru's ninja companion that can easily escape from confinement. The Chili Temple also features Soya's related antagonist, Dr. Cosmo. Clearly he is a meteorologist, with the two of them getting along like oil and water, Cosmo having sent a message to the knights for only Wataru, and for some reason, Ange to come to this exchange, which ends up not involving Nadia at all. Like, I'm not complaining about that, but you would think that'd be where the story would be going. Anj being here is a bit more questionable, but considering Stupid Hair's canonical stalking of her, Dwokdar's generals might have just had the idea of trading her to Stupid Hair for some concession or something, or they just want to kill her for other reasons. It wouldn't be the first. Regardless, they're trapped on both the Burning Plains and the Freezing Plains this time, thanks to the two blades. Hey, shouldn't there be some wet plains in between those two? Wataru is the forgiving sort, though, wanting Kurama to at least explain himself. And man, with all the awful stories built around misunderstandings in media, I really wish we had more characters like this kid. But even with the pair demolishing the forces stacked against them, the two generals think they've already won. At least until Salamande of the Dragon Clans comes into the picture. And her use here is far better than seen previously, as she comes to reestablish a long-forgotten alliance her dragon tribes had made with the dragons of Mount Ikusabe that named Wataru their savior. Begs the question of why she attacked them earlier in the game in that case, but as I said before, their inclusion at that plot juncture was just a narrative excuse done to get the buddy complex characters involved, regardless of how little sense from a character or storytelling standpoint it made. We're around the point Salamande would have become an ally in the Cross-Age content anyways, so that isn't as big a hurdle. With Sala's assistance, the Dwokdar minions are even more messed up, allowing for Lelouch to execute a plan he and Anj came up with to siege the Dwokdar generals when they were distracted, allowing the group to retrieve Himiko, though before they can grab the swords, Kurama ends up injured in the skirmish when he takes a blow meant for one of the others. As the generals withdraw to their machines, Kurama comes clean about being a spy completely, even though he did already before, and his cursed village that made him do what he did. Shibaraku threatening his life for his crimes against them, but ultimately unable to land a killing blow due to Kurama's various acts that sabotaged his own missions due to the gained camaraderie he had. Shibaraku ultimately letting him go. Anj and Sala hold off the Dwokdar generals while everyone else returns to their mechs. Anj at this point gaining the ability unlock skill for the Vilcus' special modes, which in turn saves Kurama from the retaliation of the head general Zan Cook for his treason. Soya and Cosmo still having the elemental blades permits them to reinforce Zan Cook's mech, requiring both of them be taken out first before any assaults on the head general would succeed. But even with his mech the Getider thrashed, Zan Cook has a crystal that siphons the dragon's power to himself, regenerating for one massive attack that is in turn taken by Kurama, returning with his own unit, who tanks the blow in gratitude for Wataru's long-standing kindness. With the elemental blades recovered, they supercharge RyujinMaru, letting Wataru at last one-shot Zan Cook's mech, after which it's revealed that Kurama escaped the destruction of his machine at the last moment. And people think other pilots surviving certain death in Sunrise series are a stretch. However, this is not a total victory. The damage RyujinMaru took alongside the stress of absorbing so many of the mountain's relics at once have taken their toll. RyujinMaru's physical robot form coming apart into little more than a glowing orb, leaving Wataru without his partner and devastated by the loss. However, the spirits bonded to the blades communicate with Wataru, informing him that RyujinMaru's power can be reforged anew from the blooms of the Serene Forest, which is sacred to dragons. Which leaves us on the other side of the route split, and the two sects of the knights playing catch-up to what the other experienced, with this leading into Amuro bringing up what Char was alluding to, that the Reguild Century is part of the Universal Century timeline, and the distant future for all of the Universal Century crew, and only the Universal Century crew. This is what I was getting into anytime I discussed G-Reco's relationship with other Gundam and the Turn A continuity snarl, as Sunrise's official stance for their continuity is what X has used as the basis for their World of War. While the timing of events has changed in that setting, it's hard to really argue against that. The evidence provided to back up this assertion in-game, however, being the Rose of Hermes, a historical record of all previous mobile suit technology in the Reguild Century, which is how the G-Reco factions have been reproducing Universal Century-era mecha. They have all their core blueprints. While the Reguild history isn't specific around the causes of the collapse of the Universal Century, and that's deliberate as G-Reco itself doesn't say. The fact that Tobia is from the future after the Axis incident shows that Char's actions were not behind the calamity, nor was he the source of all conflict as the wars in UC Gundam kept happening because the people who made others suffer were never allowed to be taken out of power. Amuro even admitting here that Char's actions since they were taken to Alworth being done in hopes that the current course of her guild, that is repeating ad nauseum the Universal Century's destructive pattern, could be averted, after he was devastated to learn his own failure and the myopia of everything that came after led to nothing changing at all. But of course, that last bit is lost on Amuro, who refused to even attempt to understand Char's perspective ever, instead believing that anything he'd do would just make it worse. Which again, if Amuro hadn't stonewalled him so he had no better options, that wouldn't be occurring. Like, people think I'm crazy in saying that Suzaku is a character personification of Amuro's hypocrisy put in a different setting, and yet the Super Robot Wars games just make it so easy to point out. Anyways, onto the Serene Forest. There is an LR misromanization present on the name for this one, I don't know why it's here. With intent to revive RyujinMaru. The entirety of Dwokdar's alliance, including ones we've previously beaten, coming out to stop that from happening. There's a bit of fun in the character interactions here if you have Sho fight Cruising Tom, and Lelouch counter Death God, due to their involvement in previous story scenarios. But for most part, this is filler padding out RyujinMaru's revival, which begins once enough of the generals are beaten. Zankook trying to stop them, Kurama defending Wataru again, but them in turn being saved by Himiko's father Genryusai, who, like other altered characters, has been turned into a monkey. Genryusai informs them that the blooms of the serene flowers they need are difficult to grow, as they need intense sunlight, which is hard to come by on Alworth due to the gigantic tree putting a significant volume of the planet in the shade. The game says it has to do with weak sunlight, with Alworth being a bit farther from their sun than normal Earth-like planets, but the game kind of forgets about the world tree a lot. Fortunately, we have SRW's favorite Deus Ex Machina, Banjo Haran, to provide the sunlight needed for the flowers to bloom, allowing for the revival of RyujinMaru with enhanced abilities. And RyujinMaru managed to assimilate the soul of Kurama's machine Kujinmaru, allowing for this further augmentation into Ryuomaru.
Henge! Ho! Ike! Hogadan!
このまま投げ飛ばすぞ。
変化竜王。
ここは勝負どころだ。渡れ。
必殺。放流拳。
なぜこの残兄弟が。
みんなのためにも僕は戦い。
And as a bonus to this event, the serene flowers are also the cure to the curse Kurama and his village had been afflicted with, them after the battle being used to return him to his human form. Though this finally starts to bring Dwokdar into focus since he's almost out of his original generals. The last one, Dongaro, being busy as the instructor of Dwokdar's son, Tora-O. Yes, the evil megalomaniac has a son. More on that later. As this is the point where Sala spills the backstory of her dragon tribes to the assorted Twilight Knights, of them being descended from humans that had to genetically augment themselves to be able to better process radiation that had been released upon their original Earth, thanks to the actions of Stupid Hair, and the first one to do so Aura having been captured by Stupid Hair so she can power their magic system, as the way her dragons process radiation is by converting it into draconium crystals. Cross-Ange's dragon hunt all being done to literally feed Aura her children to fuel the mana of the lands of Mana. The issue of this scene is it just entirely mangles the explanation of Embryo and Aura's backstory with how it is being delivered. The words of Sala contradicting themselves several times over with their delivery of the details, which is unfortunately consistent with X unnecessarily overcomplicating its storyline due to the way it delivers information. As most of these conflicts come about just from how plain sloppy the integration of its story is into X's larger narrative, and without there being reason for it, considering how much of X's story is facilitated by the support pillars Cross-Ange's content has provided. X says that Embryo was one of Aura's companions who came to Alworth after their civilization was devastated by wars, but omits until later that there was no war. Embryo himself devastated civilization with his followers. Thus the pair would not have been in collaboration. X says that Aura was transformed into a dragon with the assistance of the Shinbei dragon gods to tie their story to Wataru's, and she transformed her followers in turn into dragons and set up a new civilization here in the land of Mana, but omits until later that not all of her followers were transformed into dragons, nor that they were slaughtered by Embryo when he set up his designer homunculi kingdom, or the circumstances by which Aura was captured. As the way it delivers this information about Aura rebuilding a home for the survivors, then implies that all of that is solely occurring on Alworth, not their original world, and the Mitsurugi don't actually have the ability to open dimensional gates to drag them here from their original world, which is why all the Gundam antagonist groups even have allied with them in the first place. And it entirely forgets to tell you that Stupid Hair was made pseudo-immortal due to his experiments leaving him unstuck from normal reality in his pocket space, which is a pretty big essential detail for why he did everything he did, as it made him think he was a god that deserved to remake the world as he saw fit with his immortality, thus would not have been in collaboration with Aura on any of this to begin with. And worse, it makes all of the discoveries that even allowed him to do it in the first place be discovered by Aura after she was granted them by the Shinbei dragon gods, including the true star song that Embryo figured out, which is what triggers the Discord feather attack of the Ragnamales, which was what Embryo even used to begin with to devastate his original world and create the dimensional gates to other ones, which they would need to know to even, come to Alworth. X is so bad when it comes to Cross-Ange's content, it literally becomes self-contradictory. I admit, I like Cross-Ange in spite of its faults because Fukada put his foot down to resolve the majority of its worst aspects quickly, and the rest of what people may find of offense was actually the point of it in calling out how offensive that behavior is through a running object lesson about it. But no series featured in SRW deserves to be treated like a prop to hold other series up while doing wrong by it. For regardless of who have legitimate criticism against it, X makes the series look far worse than it is. And that is the worst thing any crossover series can do. Not fix it, but break it. And the damning thing about this all is, they didn't need to change any of the details. Aura could have come to Alworth independently of Embryo, not been aware of him setting up his designer homunculi society, as she made contact with the Shinbei dragon gods. The two factions make their mutual pact that got Asala as an ally, and maybe helped set up a city where survivors of their world that didn't want to get transformed into dragons to survive the radioactive wasteland Embryo had turned their world into could live, which Embryo then exterminated to follow the canon plot of Cross-Ange. As that other human society that wasn't Embryo-controlled, yeah, that's where Tusk is supposed to have come from. There are absolutely ways to do this the way they wanted to, without the self-inflicted problems. Granted, Sala could just be a really bad conveyor of information. The problem is she's still being written very badly here, in contradiction to her canon self, that delivered many of these same details without the Amalgam Universe elements in the main series, and this problem not being present when these same details were given in V. Like, I don't keep bringing up V to glorify the game, I do so to present that there is an expected bare minimum of competence with these games which V met, yet X does not. Anyways, the bottom line of all this is Stupid Hair is using every other antagonist faction he's recruited through dangling their trip back home in front of them becoming his minions and disposable forces so he can finally gain full control over Aldworth. As he sees the other nations as being vulnerable now that Lord Jenham's dead, the Dragon Guards are weakened, and the Keepers are, well, incompetent. Since he does not have pilots for the Ragnamels he does have, which would give him the power to do it himself. Seriously, despite supposedly being important, we're halfway through the game at this point, and the original characters of this game have done jack all. But we can't focus on them, as we've got another attack by Dwokdar's Alliance to deal with. One of their assaults knocking out communications as Koji, Sayaka, and Amori go out on patrol, which allows them to be ambushed by mechanical beasts, which originate from Mazinger, that are all animated by the souls of the Warriors of Olympus. As I got into in the V reviews, again if you've not watched the V reviews, please go back and watch them, Mazinger Edition Z The Impact, since it was the most recent Mazinger series at the time, had priority for that interpretation of continuity for Mazinger, and thus most of its antagonists, the Mycenaean Empire, are based on that interpretation where they were viewed as the Greek gods, or rather the Greek titans, with Zeus defecting from them and splitting their forces until he beat them, at the cost of a hand, whose crystallized form was later used as the base material that Edition Z's Mazinger was built into. And now you know why this Mazinger can convert itself into a giant rocket fist, and go full-on Goldion Finger, before Gal Gaigar vs. Betterman actually gave us the Goldion Finger. Not like that. This is all brought up because Edition Z is also another series which is in its post-series events. When Koji and company were transported to Aldworth, they had just killed Dr. Hell, allowing Ashura to kill themselves and awaken the Mycenaean gods, only for the venue for that awakening to be moved to Aldworth in this game. These Olympian warrior souls being a precursor to that by them all possessing the soulless corpses that are Dr. Hell's mechanical beasts, with intent to revive their leadership, as they're not quite awake just yet. The warriors challenge Koji to a duel and push Koji to a quarter with how strong they are, which is where Tetsuya Tsurugi in his great Mazinger comes in to interfere, and unlike last game, save Koji, breaking the barrier the Mycenaeans had set up, and letting everyone else in to help. As for why the Mycenaeans are here, in this Amalgam universe, Aldworth is apparently their homeworld. So when Zeus rebelled and defeated Hades, he sealed them all here. Thus why the Mazinger crew got dragged here after Ashura's death. The thing is, though, the Mycenaean gods waking up, apparently that is what finally makes the Keepers of Order actually pay attention to everything else going on. Their leading priest, Selric, coming in himself with the contingent of their golems to repel the appearance of the great General of Darkness. Him seeming to be above the board and calling the knights over for a discussion over the state of the planet, but it is in fact a feint, as he takes us to the Holy Tree of End that towers over the planet. End, once more, being the god of wisdom that the Keepers worship, with Selric trying to curry favor with the assembled knights, and Anj, Lelouch, and Callan being among those that aren't buying what Selric is trying to sell, as they can all see the Viper for who he is in how Selric and his disciples have allowed the escalation of conflict across the planet to occur with no intervention from them. And Lelouch pointedly asking questions that Selric refuses to answer, which are the basic bare-bones sorts of motivational and mission statement queries that are required for the formation of any organization that purports to have the goals that the Keepers claim to. I mean, Lelouch specifically would know this, considering he did found the Black Knights through answering such foundational questions as means, method, morals, and mission statements. He and the rest of the Black Knights collectively fucked up in following those, but it was nonetheless the ideal that was being strived for. If you can't even answer, "What do you do?" in a single sentence, you're probably sus. As this hospitality is with sole intent for the Keepers to get their hands back on Amory and Sparrow. For while Selric claims they are being treated well and are not under arrest, in another part of the temple, Archmage Keldine, another leader of the Keepers, has executed a full-on inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
And the entire time this is going on, Keldine, I don't know how to pronounce that, is gaslighting indoctrination triggers in Amory that all of those the Keepers take in have implanted. Over the course of the conversation, using them to brainwash her back into being one of their dolls, making her forget why she left to begin with, should she want to come back, and just throw Sparrow back in the prison he originally was locked in by them. But despite them mind-screwing her thoroughly into being a submissive doll, her propriety over manners makes Amory visit Sparrow once more in his prison, and that allows Sparrow to repeat what he did the day they first met, allowing their respective consciousness to connect briefly, and snap the mental tampering placed upon her like a twig. The backstory of the protagonist, regardless of gender, has them leave their family at a young age after discovering the power of dogma they bear, and join the Keepers in service of order and end to best utilize that power. And as I inferred earlier, all of that is a lie. Amory hasn't been there since she was a child. She just got there, and was freshly brainwashed not long before the game's story started, only managing to escape further manipulation thanks to her stumbling across Sparrow, who had figured out the secrets they tried to hide. For every member of the organization is abducted and subjected to the same mind screw, be it from the villages of Alworth or from entirely different worlds themselves, in the same way that everyone else has been isekai'd here and now. And it is, in fact, from the spells the Keepers used to do this, that everyone else has gotten dragged here. They're behind everything, as, just to skip ahead a bit, it is as you would expect of a Japanese story at this point, with how religion is used in their narratives, as evil. End is not a god of wisdom, it is a parasite, one that thrives off of eating the life energy of other sentient beings. And the reason why that summoning spell was used so recklessly is because it is waking up, and its minions are not enough to keep its hunger sated, so it needs to feed off the conflict of all these forces and ideologies clashing. And the auto-warlock the Zelgard, despite its age, can only be operated by certain natural dogma users like Amory and her male counterpart Iori, who is sent after her again to try and bring her back into the fold. The confrontation working to resolve the half-hearted will Amory has been stuck with through much of the game, thanks to the shackles the Keeper's mental tampering still held onto her in the interim. But through this second lap is starting to fracture. Her resolve to leave drawing up more of the Zelgard's power, which allows her to hold out until the rest of the knights are convinced by Lelouch's actions that the Keepers are not to be trusted, as their leader keeps explicitly reminding Lelouch of his elder brother Schneisel. Unfortunately, Iori is too far gone into the washing machine to be saved through trying to talk him down, him ranting like Suzaku would towards Lelouch, just with it being about Amory turning them all against End, when they made their decisions themselves. With that aggression all being based on how Amory was promised to Iori by the Keepers. Okay, that is a misleading statement on my part, but it is a view taken on this due to the dialogue Iori speaks in the stage, being in that same vein of being possessive towards an independent person and not liking that independent person's choices that they make for themselves. Iori is as much a victim of the Keepers and heavily indoctrinated by them. He does apologize later, and if you choose Iori as the protagonist, then you have Amory act much the same way when she is herself inserted into this role on his route. Regardless, Amory can tell now that she is not her whole self, and she needs whatever the Keepers did to her undone in full. but she's not given the time as Selric follows up on Iori immediately, trying to crush her completely.
残念だよ。伝説のドグマを見せよう。さあ、消滅の儀式だ。これがイクスハルトだ。
After that, Sparrow surrenders, robbing the Zelgard of power as Omri's broken from this betrayal, and resultantly discarded by the Keepers. The risk to her life gives the Knights pause, Lelouch in specific having to have flashbacks to the last time he was in such a situation with Callan, only for the consequences of the choice he was forced to make to be one of the things that blew up in his face. For the truth is, despite Omri being unruly and her power and asset to the Keepers, they don't actually need her. What they do need is Sparrow, as the Keepers believe that Sparrow, as a magical creature, can be used to sate End's hunger. Keeldon tries his whole Inquisition thing again, outright charging Omri with treason now. But Omri pushes back this time, now able to understand that what she feels from being in proximity to End, that the others feel, isn't strength. It's their strength being drained away. As I said, End is a parasite draining the essence of their lives away. What magic they think End gives them is in fact their own magical powers that End awakens within them that it feeds upon. And they obliviously let it happen, thinking it's the source of their strength. Which is also why Omri's power is a danger, as it's outside their system, with End having lost its connection to her mana, that over time has been restoring itself as she has been recovering. She also calls them out for summoning everyone here, about the Keepers wanting a group like the Knights to form and do their dirty work of fighting in their stead, which they of course justify that it is all done in the name of their god that preserves the world. Keeldon tries to wipe Omri's mind again, at the same time Lelouch is confronting Selric, who completely outs himself as one of the villains in all this. For as Lelouch puts it, Selric recognizes no one's justice but his own, just like Suzaku, and all justice but his own is evil, just like Suzaku, and no other path but the one he treads can be correct, just like Suzaku. For those he serves makes his decisions be right, just like Suzaku. So of course, Lelouch says he's just like his brother Schneisel. Really? Really? Like, I know Bandai is collectively myopic about the problem of Suzaku Kururugi, but it's usually not so bad as to describe him to a T, and yet still fucking miss it. As the thing is, Selric is not a master manipulator or chess master. He is, in fact, mostly reliant on the indoctrination around him to force on others his dogma. And I don't mean the spells in the series either. Well, okay, the Schneisel comparison is more in the mannerisms he presents outwardly that make him seem more cultured than he is, as opposed to ideology and modus operandi, which is more essential in judging someone by. Schneisel was a complete selfish nihilist. The game says he was selfless, but no, nihilism is solely based in arrogant self-presumption that nothing but the self matters because Schneisel was a sociopath, while Selric actually wants something, has a goal he wants to see fulfilled that is driving him, and it's leading everything to destruction as he'll sacrifice everything to get it. But again, that still more describes Suzaku to me over Schneisel. With this act, Selric strikes, letting the Knights exist so as to not destroy their temple to end before unleashing their forces. A once more brainwashed Omri among them. This goes how you'd think, with us having to beat the crap out of the mech holding her for her to snap back to her senses, permitting Wataru to use the Mirror of Truth to shine the light of it in Omri's eyes, and purify her of all the lies they forced upon her. Though since they're so close to their source, the mirror's power isn't as strong. Sparrow coming in again, after having escaped again, to break the tie on them and do the job properly, and in doing so, freeing up more of Omri's own mana to transform it into dogma power. For in fact, the reason why the Zelgard is defective is it takes in too much mana from the wielder, far more than one being drained by End can manage. But one unshackled from End, alongside a mana amplifier like Sparrow is revealed to be, who can use the ambient mana of the world to reinforce and grow Omri's own power, it gives the wielder of the Zelgard the power to shatter the sky, and surpass all limits.
行くわよ、ホープス。
いつでもどうぞマスター。
魔力とオドを一つに。体が勝手に動く。新しいドグマが生まれる。つける翼、ゼルガード。これが私たちの新たな力です。
なんだあのドグマは。
With Zelric's assault repelled, the knights leave unheeded, now having a fourth faction of consolidated enemies to deal with, though admittedly with the fewest forces out of the gathered. Zelric and Keeldin already having other plans to make the entire world come to heel.